So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the Aurum feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, it's always important understanding the layers of trade, the layers of military, and the layers of tabernacling, and came out very important information on November of this year regarding the U.S. urged to join China-led investment bank. So this is a very pertinent topic because our nation is going through very many troubles as far as the economy is concerned, and truly these thousands upon thousands upon thousands of jobs coming back to the United States, it won't take place. Obviously, only an unlearned person of no knowledge of what's going on in the world could simply believe that these jobs are coming back when they are not. But there are some forward motion from China of encouraging the United States to get in line with their system. Now, there are few factors of consideration of this topic because extremely important understanding what Daniel the prophet has recorded. Now, Daniel, as Shaul later on, he had knowledge of the prophets previously. So then, as Shaliach Shaul explained the prophecies, so Daniel explained the prophecies. He himself stated, as he was then knowledgeable and perceived the 70 years captivity because of the Shemitah, or then because of the yearly Shabbat, was not obviously obeyed. From the 490 years the nation owned the land, they never had maintained the 70 years as a time of rest of the land. So then they went into exile. So what then Daniel is explaining is simply the layers of the prophecies of Yirmiyahu the prophet. And while he was doing this, he was shown more specific understandings of future kingdoms. So, in Hebrew, we find this particular layer in Daniel, the 11th chapter, and then we find these, in Hebrew states, despised. But truly he was talking about a system, a weakened system. Not wicked as twisted. It's a system that was strong at some point and then became weak. So in Daniel, we find that this system later on is re-strengthened. Now, that's where logic comes simultaneously with instructions. China leads the world's market. with a very easy, straightforward understanding. Bringing thousands upon jobs back to this nation, it won't take place. A person can be as wishful as a person can. Simply, the market's not prone for high quality products. Not at this point in time. The market is prone for quantity and a certain price. And this country simply can't provide. It does not mean does not have the ability. That's not the point. But what is explaining later on, then the system is re-strengthened. Few verses later, the 28th verse of Daniel explains that the system is going to be re-strengthened. But it is a layer of understanding that Daniel had a divine light when he did understand what Yeshayahu the prophet was explaining. As he said in the 12th chapter, that the 70 years of captivity was ending as per Yirmiyahu. So Daniel was knowledgeable of these layers of understanding from the prophets previously. That's what later on then Shaliach Shaul was talking about, these particular layers. Now the modern deceitful world, they make their own stories and they take on their own bits and pieces of the scripture and they form in their own thinking. This is purely deceit. That's what Shaliach Shaul said. 2 Corinthians 11:4 states, and they have concocted for themselves teachers of their own doings, because they want the world to go in a certain way, and it's not going in a certain way. Not of their own. It is in a certain way, but as per the instructions. So then, Daniel had knowledge of Yeshayahu. He knew that sections of this system that was weakened obviously does not relate as United States, because certain sections of these understandings after the soul is trained, that's why Yod-He Vav-He Galat said, teach your children diligently every understanding of these holy instructions. It's because later on then the soul was trained. So, as far as the United States joining the China Bank, it's not the answer. Now there is a link of United States trade linked with China, but not the monetary system of the United States linked with the Chinese system. Now, the system of the United States and the system of Great Britain and the system of the European Union and the system of China, these are distinct and independent. So, yes, there is a link with the American trade and the Chinese trade. mostly done online. But direct link with the Federal Reserve and the USD does not have a link with the East. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for the 28th verse of the 11th chapter. The religious aspect of the East is the dragon. They don't have the values the same as the religion of this country. They believe is a savior that comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Bible background in those kinds of situations, if you believe such. They have their own teachings of Buddha, their own teachings of the East and the Eastern philosophy. They have their own teachings. And then later on explains a renewal of these understandings of what we know today as church. Otherwise, this verse shouldn't be there, because China is already great. So truly explained very clearly, if you read in Hebrew or sections in Aramaic, you find there is not a direct link with both banks, or Federal Reserve of China and the Federal Reserve of the United States. There is not a link with them. They are independent. And the only situation is going to help this nation recuperate is helping Africa and the troubles of organizing it. Now, the rare materials industry, such as coltan, we find it's vital for equipment, for electronics, space age, as it was petroleum for an engine. Now, the recuperation of this nation in economical sense speaking comes from helping Africa organizing theirs. Because the layer related with is in Yeshayahu chapter 1:8. That's where we find a layer related with what Daniel was explaining. Now, the situation is the nation wants to go in a certain direction. The instructions saying to go the other direction. We are focusing the war in the Middle East. And we don't understand. We should be helping Africa. So then it comes a time where then these people involved in the government, they simply don't understand the importance of it. Our system is spent. It became so big, it can't sustain itself anymore. And then obviously, China is trying to get a hold of us and be mixed up with the infrastructure and the investment bank. But this country must remain independent. Now, trade is another situation. Then from both banks, the American bank and the Chinese bank, then the freighters, they have to get in the center of it. That's when then the situation becomes a bit more distinct, because mostly of taxes. China has truly mastered the understanding of taxation. And this country has not yet. A lot of taxes are lost in internet. So we can't organize our financial system if we are printing so much money in a certain rate. The system simply cannot be fixed. But our system must remain independent until we help Africa organize their system, and as a favor in return, then they use our USD as a means of international exchange amongst the African countries. Then our economy, in a gradual pace, then improves. But then our government must cut costs. This means retrieval of the armed forces. Natural understanding and inviting other nations, becoming more responsible. For instance, in South America, we rarely have news of, some of those countries being a major role player in what's going on in the Middle East. But this country must consider this huge fact and employ those other nations and having them become responsible. So then we can organize our own. And later on, that's precisely what must take place. Because Daniel the prophet gives an understanding of the retrieval of the ships of Kittim. He's talking about a system that was developed in a military fashion. A layer of understanding related with this. So then a quick answer: should the United States join up with Chinese bank-wise? No. If they do it, it won't work. Now the freighters, then, they play a huge portion of it, because via the freighters comes the pure taxation in every situation is then drawn from the freighters because of the data they gather. That's when the system becomes computerized. That's what Daniel said in the 12th chapter. Then the knowledge shall increase. But what he's explaining is a specific layer of understanding related with trade. Then in Revelation you find them the freighters of the earth, and the freighters of the earth many times. Why? Because the data generated by the freighters is then sifted through and then transforms into taxation, because of the inability of the government to maintain control over the trade via the internet. So taxation, very important. Nations involved with this, very important. Now when a person is unlearned, they don't read the instructions, they don't read the writings, they don't understand English, they don't understand Hebrew, they form their own understandings without the proper world knowledge Not saying that one person has achieved a plateau that's more important than the other. No. It simply means there are triple layer: tabernacling, trade, and military. Tabernacling is important. Most people, when they learn Hebrew, they are stuck with only tabernacling. They don't understand military, they don't learn it, they don't understand the importance of learning the English language. And they concoct their own theories based upon the Hebrew without the proper knowledge of what's going on in the world. The Greco language was then the language of the trade of many centuries ago. It was the international language. That's why you find then the Greco language involved with the New Testament. Now, a person that doesn't understand English, doesn't read the instructions, what's going on, they don't understand what's going on in the world, how can the Eternal lead them? He can until a certain level, but then if they don't improve themselves, if they don't learn, how are they going to understand the links, multi-links of the prophets and these layers? They can't do it. Many scholars during the time of the Hellenistic world, they say you had to learn the Greco language to get a decent job. So English is the most important language. Trade-wise speaking, there is. Is Chinese important? Yes, it is. But in this part of the world, yet is used English as the international language of trade. And then a lot of people have only tabernacling. They don't have the knowledge of military, they don't have the knowledge of trade, and then they only get stuck in tabernacling. Then they hear some understanding of the prophets. Oh, it's interpretation. No, it's not interpretation. It's your own ignorance of not knowing enough of the military layer or the trades layer. And then when they hear, they get defensive. Why? Because they are stuck only in tabernacling. And these layers are very specific. Tabernacling is a situation, trade is another situation, military is another situation. If a person does not have the knowledge of these trio, it's not even worth talking very much. As long as the talk is only tabernacling, fine. You begin to talk about prophecy, they begin to drift away. Because they want to impose tabernacling on the other layers, thinking that then the Eternal is going to take care of the rest. No, he said to study. So Daniel, he had these understandings. He had understanding of military. You can read the movement of armies. He's talking about then the kingdom of the north later on coming with much equipment. He had knowledge of military equipment of his time and the future. Not because he had visions of the future. He had layers that the prophets previously had said. And then trade, explaining of systems, And he's speaking now also of tabernacling. A very tiny portion of tabernacling he explains. But tabernacling during his period of time was mostly explained by Ezekiel. The Eternal had shown Ezekiel a lot of layers during his lifetime, whereas Daniel was more trading and military. And then people come up with theories that the Hamashiach ben Yosef is going to establish his kingdom, and because his kingdom then is going to force the other nations of obeying the Torah, and many other types of crazy situations that it's not even worth it talking of. Because the Hamashiach ben Yosef already said in 24th chapter of Mechichiyahu, Yod-He Vav-He is not part of this particular kingdom during this age. And the kingdom of the Hamashiach is not the same as the kingdom of Yod-He Vav-He. That's why then military and trade, when it's not properly studied, then they want to put the Hamashiach tabernacling on top of it, and then begins a ruler of the world, ruling the nations, their militaries, and then their trade. And as we read from the Holy Instructions, the Hamashiach was not involved with the trade. But then they put him on top of the whole situation. And somehow, some way, he's going to become this kingdom in this world. And if you read this in Hebrew, you don't find it. Because the layer related is not with the Hamashiach ben Yosef becoming king. It's related with post-autumn feast. That's where then the lack of the English language, lack of understanding of trade and military then begins to show very precisely. Lack of knowledge of military and trade. Now, do you speak English? No, don't speak any English. Okay, how do you understand the trade in the world? Based from what the prophets had said. No answer. What do you understand of military? You barely understand how a nuclear weapon travels in the air. Then they take the Hamashiach ben Yosef and place on top of trade and military and rule the whole world, forcing everybody to obey the Torah. First, Yod-He Vav-He does not force. He won't force the nations to obey the Torah. Each person should make a decision in understanding these holy instructions. Because Shaliach Shaul, Shaliach Shimon mostly said each person is responsible for his soul. So the Hamashiach ben Yosef is not going to force the Torah in anybody, in any nation. Because each person is responsible for his soul. Shaliach Shimon is already giving the answer. So next time we're going to evaluate more of the situation regarding then taxation. Why it's so important from a bank A, a bank B, and then the freighters in the center. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.